thank you for joining us today for our next webinar. If you're not already, if you could just please make sure that you are muted as you join us, and then we'll get cracking. So I'm Katie Armstrong, I'm the Hub Lead for Flying High English Hub. Like I said, thank you for joining us today. This is the fourth webinar in our series about the writing framework, which came out back in July last year. I can actually say last year now. If you have missed any of the previous webinars, please do get in touch with us via email at englishhub@flyinghightrust.co.uk, and we can email those recordings over to you so you can catch up. As you know, the writing framework is non-statutory guidance which articulates a common approach to teaching writing, and it's rooted in evidence and existing good practice. And today I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about transcription. So we'll be thinking about the importance of teaching spelling and handwriting effectively to reduce the cognitive load on pupils and ensure that they become skilled writers who write fluently and legibly. And just also to let you know, before we get cracking, we have had some hot off the press confirmation from the DFE that from September this year, so September 26, we will be able to offer support in reception classes too. So helping to develop that early language and early literacy. So please do look out for further information about that. If you're not on our mailing list, please do let us know via email and we can add you on. And please do follow us on socials because all the information will be on there too. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on X, we're on Instagram. So if you just search for us as Flying High English Hub, we should come up. But all the information about that exciting new development will be released on there too. Okay, let's jump straight into it then and think about transcription. Let me just move things around on my screen so I can find my buttons. There we go. Okay, so we know that there is a simple view of reading that the reading framework highlights that describes reading as the product of decoding, so reading the words, and language comprehension. So in that we've now similarly got a simple view of writing, where writing has been described as the product of transcription skills, that's the spelling and the handwriting, and composition, so thinking about vocabulary, grammar and punctuation, which is sometimes referred to as text generation. And this has been summarised, as you can see on the screen there, as the simple view of writing. And ideally, we would like all children to be up in there in that top right quadrant, being competent writers with good language composition and also good transcription skills. That's what we're aiming for. So the programmes of study for writing at Key Stages 1 and 2 are divided into transcription and composition. And it's essential that teaching develops pupils' competence in both of these areas. So when we're thinking about transcription, beginner writers, we know, are having to think really carefully and consciously about everything they do when they're writing, from holding the pen correctly to forming the letters legibly, combining letters to make words, and then using those words to express their ideas in the content of their writing. So if the children have to really concentrate to make sure their handwriting and their spelling is accurate, what we know is that they'll have less working memory available to think about the content of their writing. Sorry, I'm just seeing something jump up in the chat. I'm not quite sure why you can't see the screen. We have tested it and it was working. So if anybody else can't see it, please let me know and I can try and reload it, but it was showing. Oh, fabulous. Thanks, Jay, answering that one. Sorry, I'll carry on. So we need to make sure that children's handwriting and their spelling is really secure so that we can free up their working memory to think about the content of their writing and the ideas that they want to get down on the page. For skilled writers, we know that transcription is mainly automatic and unconscious, but novice writers do need to think of and use an awful lot of their attention and focus on the handwriting and the spelling. So once we gain the automaticity, in order to gain the automaticity, we need explicit teaching, extensive practice, and effective feedback to move this forward. Okay, so the importance of reception. We know that the emphasis in reception should be on building the foundations for writing. It's important to understand the important role that reception plays in building the foundations for writing for our children. These foundations support children throughout their primary school journey and will eventually underpin their success in the end of Key Stage 2 tests and prepare them for effective secondary education. To make sure that children get off to the best start and to give them the best chance of later success in writing, the emphasis in reception should be on building their foundations, the transcription and the composition. And this means keeping things simple, but doing those simple things really well. Teachers should introduce regular explicit handwriting instruction in addition to phonics early in reception. So to build these strong foundations, handwriting instruction should start in term 1 of reception and be taught by trained teachers and practitioners. For the first few weeks, it might include building the foundations for handwriting, such as practicing movements in the air, whether you're using water, big chalks, and getting the children, their muscles used to moving in those ways. But while children are developing their ability to form letters and spell in reception, the majority of their sentence level composition is got to be carried out orally, because we know at the moment the words that they can say and the words that they can write aren't at the same level. So we need to make sure we've got lots of sentence level composition orally and we're developing their language. So using visual prompts like images from a story or photographs, along with sentence stems to support the children in organising their spoken language into structures that are suitable for written language. Okay, for handwriting, it's really important that pupils are taught handwriting precisely in a clearly sequenced progression. The importance of handwriting in developing pupils' overall writing can't be overstated. We know that fluent handwriting is a significant predictor of positive writing outcomes, while a lack of fluency can constrain pupils. A key objective, therefore, is for pupils to achieve automaticity in handwriting. Gaining that automaticity requires explicit teaching, extensive practice, and effective feedback. Pupils should be taught handwriting precisely in a clearly sequenced progression, starting in reception, to support their gradual acquisition of skills. Handwriting practice should be daily until pupils can write legibly and easily even. It should be taught in small steps with lots and lots of opportunities for practice. It should be cumulative, so we're building on what they've learned previously and then adding new knowledge to that. It should be consolidated before we move on to new learning so that we're not practicing letters incorrectly. It should be revisited when further practice is needed. It should be clearly demonstrated by the teacher, but it should also be in addition to any handwriting that forms part of your phonics teaching. And that's really important because in phonics, when we have handwriting or letter formation in that lesson, the thinking behind that is that the children are developing their knowledge of that squiggle representing that sound. So they're building their grapheme phoneme correspondence and learning what the shape of that sound looks like on a page. It's not necessarily focusing on the formation of that letter and perfecting that letter formation. So we do need to do it in addition to handwriting, to phonics lessons. So handwriting and phonics should both be happening. And when we are looking at handwriting, we need to focus on the explicit teaching of both the letter formation, so controlling the size of the letters, the speed that we do it, the direction that your pencil travels in to form that letter, as well as the physical elements. So holding and manoeuvring the pencil, positioning your body, positioning your paper. So we need to think about all of these things for our children and making it explicit of what they need to do. So in the early stages of writing, whenever children put pencil to paper, they should be reminded of how to hold their pencil correctly, where to start letters, what's the correct place to start for that letter, and which direction we need to travel in to form that letter correctly. And these habits need to be checked regularly until that skill becomes automatic through muscle memory. So every time we pick up a pencil, we're doing a check, show me your pencil grip, having a quick scan around the room. Can we see that everybody's holding their pencil correctly in the right place? We're not holding it up here, so we've not got lots of control. We're down at the end of the paint, holding it in an accurate grip. And again, we might need some supports to help the children hold them properly, but we need to be checking and getting these habits established early. Schools should also consider the writing surface and the implement that's suitable for the purpose of the activity. Some experts agree that pencil and paper give greater feedback, sensory feedback, and greater control over handwriting strokes than whiteboards. If your school does choose to use whiteboard marker pens for certain tasks, it's recommended that the whiteboard pen is a similar size to your standard pencil. Thinking about the physical elements then, we need to be developing the physical skills for handwriting that they require, again, substantial, explicit teaching and practice, as well as an appropriate classroom setup. Pupils should always be taught to use a stable writing position which supports their forearm, their wrist and their hand when writing, in order to be able to write without discomfort and to develop the speed and the stamina they need. The writing position should enable the arm to move freely and support the hands so the fingers can manipulate the writing implement in those tiny movements that we need to form the letters. And the easiest way to achieve this is sitting at a table. And ideally at a table, we need to think about the size of the table and the chairs. So are we allowing the children to sit with their feet flat on the floor and their knees in that 90-degree position, with their bottom at the back of the chair? And ideally then this should be a fist width from their tummy to the table, so they're sitting close enough but not too close. And then thinking about two hands, one hand's going to be holding the paper still, the other hand on holding your writing implement. So we need to think about that setup and what that looks like for our children. So the way that the child grips the pencil will also affect the quality, the speed and the flow of their handwriting. So it's important that we as adults are modelling the correct way to hold the pencil and maintain the posture. So we don't want children sitting like this while they're writing. We need to maintain that posture, which is why we need to develop those core muscles and modelling that correct pencil grip for our children. And that needs to be done throughout school. So we need the same routines of how we sit, how we hold our pencil all the way through school to make sure that we're all using an effective grip. Most children do find the tripod grip the easiest to learn, and like I said, we can have supports to help develop that. Thinking about letter formation, pupils first need to form the shape of each letter correctly, starting and finishing each one at the right point, and ensuring its size is properly related to other letters in the same family. So if we're writing an A and a D, the circular part of each letter should be roughly the same size. So it's making sure that we're thinking about the size in relation to other letters. The families are grouped according to where each letter starts, and although the families may differ slightly depending on the handwriting programme used, they do have patterns in how they're formed. So asking children to copy from the board or a book, or trace around dotted letters, or practice without supervision can hinder their ability to build those strong mental models of the movement patterns that underpin letter formation. Pupils need to pay attention to how letters and joins, when they get there, are formed, and teachers should be modelling this live in handwriting lessons. It's also worth noting that joined handwriting shouldn't be taught until pupils can form the letters unjoined. So until they can form the letters accurately in the print form, consistently and correctly, we don't want to think about adding any joins in. It's also worth considering the children that are left-handed and the adaptations that they need. So about 10% of pupils, myself included, are left-handed and face some of the following problems. So we have smudging, obscuring the writing with the writing hand, and also difficulty in making finger spaces between words. So when a right-handed person writes in English, their hand is drawn away from the writing as they write, allowing them to easily see what's on the page. However, when you're left-handed, your hand follows behind the writing, so we can often cover what has been written, so you can't see it. So we need to think about how they're able to read what they've written. So they might need specific demonstration and adjustments, including making sure that they've got the space. So one thing I would definitely do is know who your left-handed children are and make sure that they're on the left-hand side of the table if they're sharing a table with a right-handed child. Because if the left-handed child's on the right, we get those bumped elbows. So just making sure that we're always on the left-hand side so we don't collide. We also need to slant the paper of left-handed children slightly to the right, so that the bit they've written is slightly higher, so it's easier to see the words and letters that they've already formed. Some left-handed children may also benefit from a softer pencil rather than the usual one that you use, because that would require less pressure for them. And they may also need to grip their pencil slightly higher up the pencil so that their fingers don't get in the way and they can see around the fingers what they've written. And then just something else to note is that right-handers will find it easier to make the crossing strokes from left to right, but the reverse is true for left-handers, and it shouldn't be discouraged. So for example, on the letter T, once you've gone down and round, for most right-handed children, they would go from the left and pull forward. As a left-handed person, it's easier to go to the right of the letter and pull back. That won't impact on the letter formation and it won't impact on the join, so you don't have to discourage that. It's just something to be aware of. But it is, like I said, really important that teachers know who their left-handed children are, but also noting that some children currently in reception may not have decided which is their dominant hand and may still be swapping. So if they're still at that point, that's absolutely fine. They will develop their dominance, but knowing who your left-handed children to look out for is important. And then thinking about handwriting in phonics. So like I said earlier, we do need handwriting and phonics to be taught separately because pupils need that explicit handwriting teaching extra in addition to what they do in phonics lessons. And the order that letter formation is taught in handwriting is different from the order that the phonemes are introduced in your phonics programme. This is because the phonics programmes are written in an order that will enable children to read lots of words quickly. So most programmes tend to start with SATPIN, S-A-T-P-I-N, because we can make lots of short words using those letters. But they're not all formed in the same way when thinking about handwriting. So the handwriting order tends to be different. And typically the handwriting families tend to look like this. It might differ slightly depending on what programme you're using for handwriting, but usually you can see on the screen there, we tend to have all those that start with the letter C in their formation as one family, the top to bottom going down letters, it's another family, down, up and over, or that one-armed robots are sometimes called, as another family, so that how they are formed, they're grouped together to make it easier for the children to learn. But pupils should be taught both the handwriting and the phonics consistently and systematically in the right order for each programme. Okay, spelling. So spelling teaching should be regular and consistent. It should be taught in small steps with lots of opportunities for practice. And from the start of reception, spelling should be taught through phonics. As with handwriting, spelling should be explicit, cumulative and engaging. It should be regular and consistent, taught in small steps with lots and lots of opportunities for practice. The goal is to make sure that pupils can spell accurately so it becomes automatic. Gaining automaticity requires that explicit teaching, extensive practice, and effective feedback. And when we're doing spelling practice, it should include learning new words, practicing previously taught words to develop the speed and automaticity of spelling those words, learning common exception words, independent practice activities, planned opportunities to explore the morphology of words, and also that encouragement and acknowledgement and feedback that the children will need to improve. A school-wide systematic approach to spelling that acknowledges and includes phonics, orthography, and morphology should be taught in all year groups. Spelling should follow the progression of the school's phonics programme. So while children are learning to read and write in reception in year 1 and above if necessary for their phonics, the teaching of spelling should follow the progression of the school's phonics programme. All of the validated phonics programmes support children to develop their spelling by ensuring that they learn to segment spoken words into their phonemes. To encode or to spell words, children are first taught to identify the phonemes in the spoken word. This is also referred to as segmenting spoken words. They then write the graphemes that represent each of the phonemes. So, for example, if we've got the word frog, the child would have to segment the word frog into its 4 sounds, f, r, g, and then use the grapheme phoneme correspondences that they know to represent each sound with the correct grapheme. The SSP programmes also include common words that contain GPCs that are unusual or have not yet been taught. So these might be your tricky words, common exception words, red words, whatever your programme calls it. And children should be taught to spell these words by noting which part it is that's the exception to what they've learned so far. Dictation can also be used as part of your phonics teaching at the beginning of reception to help improve spelling. So thinking about orthography, morphology and etymology, pupils should continue to use phonics throughout primary school to help them spell. However, the fact that one phoneme can be spelt with many different graphemes is a more significant challenge as we go further up school. So the national curriculum emphasises both teaching GPCs, but also building pupils' wider understanding to help them choose the right grapheme to represent the phoneme in a word. This can be supported if pupils know letter pattern conventions or orthography, if they know the units of meaning in words, the morphology, and to a more limited extent, the origins of words, the etymology. And these are all strengthened by their exposure to words in their reading. The National Curriculum Spelling Appendix does not expect pupils to understand the theoretical concepts of orthography, morphology and etymology, but it provides a clear sequence of stage-appropriate knowledge. It sets out the rules, conventions and the origins of words to help teachers to support pupils to spell accurately. So if you've not looked at it recently, it's worth looking at that spelling appendix in the National Curriculum. Dictation. Dictation in the classroom refers to a trained adult reading a sentence aloud so that pupils can write down word for word what is being said. So for example, the teacher would begin by saying and repeating the whole sentence. So you can see at the bottom of the slides there, we've got a couple of examples from the owl babies. The first one being the nest had twigs, sticks and moss. So the teacher would begin by saying the sentence and repeating that whole sentence. The children then repeat the sentence several times and then count the words in the sentence. So after repeating a few times, we'd have the nest had twigs, sticks and moss. So we know there are 7 words in that sentence. What we would then want to see is that this whole sentence is written live by the teacher as they model that thinking aloud of what to do. So what was my first word? The. Oh, it's my tricky word, the. It's on my tricky word mat. I can use that to help me. I need to think about the handwriting, the letter formation for each of those letters in that word. The. I've done that word. What was next? What's the next word in our sentence? The nest. So I need a finger space. And we'd model each part of that as we go through so the children can really see explicitly what's happening in my head as I write that sentence. And the children can join in with the process of segmenting. So when we get to nest, they can help us segment the 4 sounds there and match up the graphemes that we need. And also rereading it with you to check it matches what you counted out on your fingers and practice saying. Once the sentence is complete, we'd then hide it and the children write the sentence themselves. So they're going to use all that modelling they've just seen to have a go at writing the same sentence. And at this point, as adults, we need to be circulating with our marking pen in hand to monitor progress and offering that immediate feedback. But it is important to note that when we're planning these sentences for dictation, that we're only including the phonics knowledge that the children have been taught and can therefore apply. So we wouldn't be including any graphemes, any digraphs, anything like that, that the children haven't yet been taught. Dictation is helpful for all children, but it can be particularly useful for less confident writers because it removes the additional demand of thinking of their own words to write down. The national curriculum says that dictated sentences enables pupils to apply and practice their spelling. Dictation is not an assessment or a test. It provides a chance for an adult to model many writing behaviours, including handwriting, matching sounds to letters to spell words, and sentence formation. It's important to remember that dictation involves children writing down spoken words or sentences. They're not copying it from the board, and it also includes basic punctuation. Dictated sentences can also continue into Year 1 to support children's transcription skills and allowing them to apply their growing knowledge of alternative GPCs, as well as other sentence features like connectives and punctuation. So you see the second sentence on the slides there, we've got and extending the sentence. So you've got 2 clauses that have been stuck together there with that coordinating conjunction and. So we can use dictated sentences to practice those skills as well to enable the children to develop them. Okay, just a note on typing. Typing, just like handwriting, requires sequential teaching in small steps with considerable opportunities for practice and an expert instructor. For developing writers, research suggests that handwriting has advantages for learning over typing. The National Curriculum for English does not refer to typing as a statutory requirement. However, Typing is a skill that pupils will eventually need to develop. For primary schools, it would be most appropriate to introduce typing in upper Key Stage 2. By then, most pupils will have developed a sufficient level of motor dexterity, coordination, and handspan to engage with it. Typing, like handwriting, does require sequential teaching in small steps with considerable opportunities for practice and an expert instructor. For most pupils, teaching typing should therefore not be prioritised at the expense of teaching handwriting. Learning to type such that is automatic takes considerable time. So even with a 30-minute lesson every week for 36 weeks, research suggests that pupils are unlikely to reach any level of automaticity and will type much more slowly than they can write. So therefore, teaching typing should therefore not be prioritised at the expense of teaching handwriting. Motivation. Okay, so we know that ensuring children have the chance of success and helping them to manage negative emotions supports their motivation. It's both a driver and an outcome of their learning. Encouraging pupils to believe that they can be successful and make progress, ensuring they have a chance of success, and helping them to manage any negative emotions supports their motivation. These are all parts of teaching writing. Achieving something difficult gives a pupil a sense of pride and contributes to their well-being. Sometimes pupils are motivated simply by the challenge and joy of learning, as in phonics or handwriting lessons. It is important that children aren't discouraged from pursuing their own personal writing. So although it's not important to expect novice writers to compose beyond their capability, it's also important that they're not discouraged from pursuing their own personal writing. This could take place in a variety of ways, both timetabled and otherwise. For example, providing opportunities to use writing within continuous provision in the early years, in timetabled sessions, in extracurricular writing clubs, or by encouraging writing independently outside of school. Schools should celebrate the compositions pupils produce of their own accord. However, it should not be instead of teacher-directed time that focuses on the foundational knowledge for writing. Pupils who need the most support. So we know that high quality teaching is central to ensuring that all pupils are given the best possible opportunity to achieve. However, some pupils may find it more difficult than others to make progress. Teachers should try to understand which aspect of writing a pupil is finding difficult. This could include handwriting, their knowledge of GPCs to use for spelling, other aspects of spelling, sentence structure and grammar, composition, or their language. It isn't always possible to know what the problem is just by looking at a piece of writing. However, a sound knowledge of the process that underpins writing will enable teachers to respond flexibly to the challenges faced by pupils with writing difficulties. Teachers should aim to tackle the aspects of writing that a pupil finds difficult and tackle individual needs during the whole class teaching. This will make sure that pupils are included and it avoids them missing out on other areas of the curriculum. There may be circumstances where individual support, separate from whole class teaching, is required, and this should be carefully considered. In handwriting, teachers will easily spot pupils who are struggling through noticing. So for example, poor letter formation or poor pencil grip. Just by observing the children and what they're doing, moving around the classroom, looking over shoulders, looking at their letter formation, how they're holding the pencil, we'll be able to spot those things quite easily. These pupils will find composition difficult because their working memory will be heavily loaded with the demands of transcription. So they may lack the motivation to write because of the discomfort they experience, or may struggle to read their own work if their writing is illegible. So teachers should consider providing individual support during the handwriting lesson to improve the aspect that the pupil is struggling with. They should provide regular instruction and opportunity to practice handwriting. We also need to consider whether it might be appropriate to provide extra time to complete writing activities, since sometimes more time can be helpful for pupils who have difficulty writing. Supporting pupils with writing through digital devices, particularly when transcription is a barrier to composition, might be something you consider. Assistive technology, such as scribing, Dictation software and word processors can support older pupils who struggle with transcription. They should not be excluded from composition elements of writing. However, they do still need handwriting instruction and practice. Pupils who struggle with spelling will find it difficult to attend to composition. Some studies have shown that many pupils with some types of SEND struggle with spelling, which can slow down their writing as greater hesitation occurs. This is true even when the demands on working memory are fewer and composition is not required, such as during dictation or copying tasks. Phonics is the primary way to teach spelling. Teachers should assess pupils' knowledge of GPCs, and their spelling should also be regularly assessed. Pupils who continue to struggle with spelling beyond the end of their Key Stage 1 phonics programme may benefit from continuing with phonics for spelling. They may also benefit from explicit teaching of morphology and etymology. Okay, next steps then. The writing framework is the Department for Education's first step in a longer-term strategy to support schools to improve writing, teaching and attainment. And it will take time for schools to plan and implement the changes that might be needed in order to have a long-term impact. So as we've discussed previously in these webinars, leaders need to ensure that staff attend the Writing Framework webinars for further implementation advice and support. We also need to make sure that we've all read the Writing Framework and are aware of what it means for us at this moment in time. Teachers should use the audits within the Writing Framework to evaluate their current classroom practice and use the guidance, particularly the appendices, to support their teaching practice. There are 2 more webinars coming in this series, so please do look out for those as well.